Prime Field.
UConn, Texas, South Carolina, 3 brands that all drop 100 plus on December 7th. But if you strip away the logos and just watch the film, only one of them looks like the real number one right now. The team with the clearest, most reliable answer to one question, who can defend for us tonight, is the team that owns December, not March, not on paper, right now. All 3 played by games. All 3 blew the doors off overmatched opponents. UConn beat DePaul 102-35. Texas crushed Prairie View A&M 101-42. South Carolina rolled NC Central 106-42. On the surface, that looks like 3 versions of the same story. It's not. When you dig into how those games were won, the defensive habits, the rotation integrity, the way depth actually showed up in live possessions, a gap opens up, and UConn sits on top of it. Let's start in Chicago. UConn against DePaul wasn't just a blowout. It was a defensive scrimmage that counted. DePaul shot 27% from the field, 13 for 48. That's ugly on its own. But the real tell is the turnovers. UConn forced 32 turnovers. That's 44.4% of DePaul's possessions ending without a shot. Almost every other trip down the floor, DePaul didn't even test the rim. Watch how that happens. The point of attack defender gets into the ball early, outside the three-point line. The first pass to the wing is contested, not conceded. As soon as DePaul tries to swing it or put it on the floor, the second defender is already in a gap, stunting at the dribble and taking away driving angles. You see guards digging down from the nail, but they're not over-helping. They stunt, force the ball handler to pick it up, and then recover on the flight of the pass. That's why the turnovers aren't just bad decisions. They're forced mistakes, created by pressure that's timed with the ball's movement. UConn turned those 32 turnovers into 52 points. That's the key. It's not just disruption for the sake of it. It's disruption translated into offense, into layups, into rhythm threes trailing the break. The defense is feeding the scoring, and look at who's finishing those plays. The bench puts up 48 points. There's no single super sub bailing them out. It's a rotation where every player who touches the floor understands the same defensive rules and the same offensive lanes in transition. This is where the depth conversation changes. On paper, you can question whether UConn has enough bodies, whether the rotation is too tight, whether the interior becomes vulnerable, if Sarah Strong gets into foul trouble. But against DePaul, the depth wasn't hypothetical. It was 48 bench points in a game where the standards never dropped when the starters sat down. In Big East play, UConn is allowing just 51.9 points per game. That's not pace-inflated noise. That's a program standard. Opponents don't just shoot poorly, they struggle to complete actions. They don't get into their sets. They don't build any kind of rhythm. That's what a number 1 profile looks like in December. A defensive structure that travels, that repeats, that doesn't care who the opponent is. Now, slide to Austin. Texas puts up a 101-42 win over Prairie View A&M. The scoreline looks almost identical to UConn's, but the way they get there is different. The story of that night is Breya Cunningham. 30 points, 14 rebounds, 12 of 18 from the field in just 28 minutes. That's not empty production. That's a big controlling the game inside the arc. Watch how Texas uses her. You see horn sets where Cunningham starts at the elbow, then rolls hard after setting a flat screen for the ball handler. If the tag is late, it's a pocket pass and 2 points. If the help comes early, that opens up the skip to the weak side. Texas is using her as both a finisher and a pressure point in the middle of the floor. The efficiency tells you she isn't chasing numbers. 66% from the field on that kind of volume means she's getting deep catches, carving out space, sealing early in the clock. It also means the guards are delivering the ball where she can actually do something with it. Madison Booker's line, 13 points, 12 rebounds, 3 steals, shows you the secondary layer. Booker cleans the glass, initiates offense, and jumps passing lanes. Texas looks like it has multiple initiators and multiple finishers, and that is real. The Longhorns have now won 32 straight at home. That doesn't happen by accident. Defensively, they pressure the ball, they turn teams over, and they use those live ball turnovers to control tempo. But here's where the conversation shifts. When you zoom out past the Prairie View game, you hit their strength of schedule question. Before facing North Carolina, only UCLA and South Carolina and Las Vegas count as true high-end tests. That South Carolina game, a 66-64 overtime win, is the one that tells you who Texas really is. In that matchup, Texas didn't blow the Gamecocks off the floor. They didn't suffocate them, they survived them. Cunningham and Rory Harmon made plays in tight spaces. Texas executed late game sets, hit contested shots, and got just enough stops. Winning close against an elite program matters. It shows you they can execute late, that they have a closing package. But that's a different profile than UConn's. Texas looks like a team built to manage late game pressure. UConn looks like a team built to delete the need for late game pressure altogether. Also, look at how Texas handles the ball. They're winning the turnover margin by about plus 16 per night through December. That's massive. But they still commit around 10.8 turnovers per game themselves. As the competition level rises, that number creeps up. In games like UCLA, you see pockets where the offense bogs down, where the spacing shrinks, and possessions turn into the late clock pull-ups. The margin for error shrinks in March when every one of those empty trips gets punished. So, with Texas, the question isn't, are they legit? They are. The question is their dominance as repeatable as UConn's, or is it more dependent on individual shot making and late game execution? Now move to Columbia. South Carolina is operating in a post-Aliyah Boston world, and the identity looks different. The hub now is Ta'Niya Latson. Latson comes over after averaging 25.2 points per game at Florida State. She's a pure scorer, and December 7th against NC Central was the explainer. 32 points, season high. South Carolina wins 106-42, and Latson looks like the best player on the floor from the opening tip. Watch her possessions. She's using ball screens to get downhill, pulling up when defenders try to go under, and getting to the line when the big drops too deep. She's reading coverages, not just running plays. When she touches the paint, the weak side corner has to decide, stay home or tag. Either choice is wrong, that part is real. Latson can create efficient offense against almost any basic coverage. The Gamecocks can hang triple digits on bad defenses, because she and Joyce Edwards create a problem at both guard and forward spots. But South Carolina's issues start where UConn's and Texas don't. Depth reliability. Against NC Central, the bench production looks fine because the talent gap is enormous. But when you plug them back into that overtime loss to Texas and Las Vegas, the flaws show up. In that game, South Carolina needed Latson to expand her usage and create late clock looks. The more she had to do, the less efficient the overall offense became. The supporting cast didn't consistently generate clean secondary actions. Kick-out threes turned into contested jumpers. Post entries turned into tough catches outside the lane. Add in the fact that Tessa Johnson was sidelined by illness against NC Central, and Medina Okoa left that game with an injury, and you see how fragile the depth chart can feel. If one or two rotation players are missing or limited, the drop-off is noticeable. South Carolina's bench contributions come in waves, not as a steady baseline. On nights when the starters are rolling, it looks fine. On nights when Latson or Edwards struggle, they don't have the same margin for error that UConn's structure gives, or the late-game shot-making cushion that Texas has already proven. So where does that leave the who's number one right now question? Look at the weaknesses. UConn's primary concern is theoretical. If Sarah Strong gets into foul trouble, what happens to the interior defense and the defensive rebounding? That's a fair question. But the key word is if. UConn hasn't been forced into that scenario yet because the games haven't been close enough to test it. They were ending contests in the second and third quarters by dismantling offensive structure. Texas's weakness is more tactical. Their turnover profile looks great on paper because they win the margin, but the offense still gives possessions away. Against elite teams with length and discipline, those live ball turnovers can turn into 6 or 8 point runs in under a minute. Their best win, South Carolina in overtime, required high-level individual creation from Cunningham and Harmon. That's repeatable, but it's not as automatic as system-driven stops. South Carolina's weakness is the most concrete. Their depth has already been exposed when they've stepped up in class. They rely on Latson to trigger almost everything, and when her efficiency dips or when role players are out, the offense tightens up. That's a real on-film problem, not a hypothetical one. So when you stack all three side by side, the picture sharpens. UConn shows you a defensive infrastructure where every player on the floor is connected. 32 forced turnovers, 48 bench points, 51.9 allowed per game in league play. They don't need an opponent's logo to get locked in. They don't need a rivalry game to defend. They defend because that's the baseline. Texas gives you star power in Cunningham, a versatile engine in Booker, and a proven ability to win close against another blue blood. But their dominance is still tied to the context. Home streak, opponent quality, and late-game shot making. South Carolina gives you an apex scorer in Latson and high offensive ceilings. But the gaps in their rotation and the volatility of their bench show up as soon as the other team can match their talent. And that's the point of December. This month isn't about who has the best ceiling in March. It's about who already plays playoff basketball on a random Sunday against an overmatched team. Who already has the habits, the rotations, the communication, and the discipline that will actually scale when the bracket comes out. Right now, that answer is UConn. They're not just undefeated, they're the most complete. Their identity is not built on a single star or a single matchup. It's built on the simplest, most reliable thing in basketball. You don't get clean looks against them. Until someone forces UConn into a game where their theoretical weaknesses become real, the Huskies own the crown for December. Texas and South Carolina both have the talent to take it later. But if you're ranking who looks like the best team today, the film says UConn is already where everyone else is trying to get.
Prime Field